So thank you for having me here tonight. I'm very honored to speak and present about the German energy transition. Of course, thank you for mentioning it. Yes, I'm German. You would have guessed by now at the very latest. And I also, beyond this verbal input here, also on the tables, you find a very limited number of these leaflets. So it's maybe you can share or pass them around. I think there's just 2 or so copies per table, so it's very limited. But I'll tell you a little bit more, and this is obviously related to what I'm going to say now. So, yeah, I am the president of the Ecologic Institute in the United States, and the Ecologic Institute is a nonprofit, independent Center for Environmental Research and Action, and we do have an Ecologic Institute in Berlin, in Germany, where I also started initially in 2007, and then 2014 moved across the Atlantic, and since then have been working in Washington, D.C., and it's very exciting because, of course, the work on energy and climate is similar, but it's also, in a lot of ways, it's different. So it's not a very smooth transition in all terms, so I'm still learning a lot every day. And then I wanted to also say that I'm not the only one working on this transatlantic energy and climate dialogue, and this is here, this logo, the Transatlantic Climate Bridge. I wanted to just, this is a brief history lesson. This was an initiative created in 2008 between the governments of Germany, the United States, and Canada also then. And so it's already 8 years old, almost getting to the 9th anniversary, and it's been very successful in a lot of ways in bridging and sharing knowledge and having some forum or some platform. So we also, as the Ecologic Institute, work a lot with or around that transatlantic climate bridge, but we're of course not the only ones working on that. So today here, I want to talk to you just about a few key aspects about the energy transition, because I was given just a few minutes and not a few hours to talk about it. So I'm going to focus on key, key aspects, and namely accessibility, affordability, and adaptability. And what I mean by that, accessibility, is primarily, if you look at Germany, the energy transition, one number from 2012, 46% of all installed renewable capacity was owned by citizens, citizen groups, or cooperatives. So that's almost 50%. And that's very important because that created a lot of the foundation for political acceptability or acceptance for the process. And the second one, affordability. Of course, everybody will agree that that's important, I think, from all sides, but it's of course means different things for different people. It means something completely different if you're a household, at a household level, or a business. And this really is looking at both of these, monitoring, of course, the cost development, but then also taking action, because just looking at it is clearly not enough. And action at different levels. And the third one, adaptability. So the energy transition in Germany is already quite old, actually. It's started before the millennial, and we already have the third iteration of the law, or the third real revision of the law, and so it's changed quite a lot. We've seen also 3 different governments in this process, with 4 different parties involved in these governments, and there's been a tremendous change also if you look, of course, at the technology level. Especially if you look at solar, and the cost of renewables have come down quite a bit in not just solar, but also in wind and also in other renewables. So there's been kind of a sea change in this process. But let's go back all the way to the fundamentals, or the actual, what is the energy transition, or as the Germans call it, the Energiewende. So we have 5 pillars of goals, or 5 central goals. And of course, in the middle, we have what probably is the number one thing, is reducing greenhouse gas emissions, because after all, that's kind of the motivation for the whole thing. And the first interim goal was 40% emissions reductions compared to 1990 by 2020. And then the longer term goal is 80% emissions reduction by 2050. But then let's also quickly look at the other targets, because they're also very relevant. They make it also more tangible in a lot of ways. One is dedicated to renewables and electricity. And there the first goal is for 2020 to have 35% of renewables in the electricity. And then for 2050, we want 80% renewables in electricity. But we don't just talk about electricity, because it's not the electricity transition, it's the energy transition, so it's all energy. Now there, of course, it's challenging in a lot of ways. We know that, transport or heating. So there, the targets are a little bit more humble, maybe. For 2020, it's an 18% target there, and for 2050, it's a 60% target for renewables there. And then it's not just adding more, it's also reducing. And that's not always very popular, but there are reduction targets. One is for the electricity sector. There's the first target is for 2020, 10% cut in electricity consumption compared to 2008. And then for 2050, it's a 25% cut in electricity consumption. And then they also want to go at total energy consumption. And that's very ambitious too. There the goal is for 2020, it's a 20% total cut of energy consumption. And for 2050, 50% cut compared to 2008. So how are we doing there? How is that working? So the first thing is to look at total greenhouse gas emissions from 1990 to today, and we see we have cut greenhouse gas emissions significantly. It's about 25%, actually a little more, down since 1990. It's of course still quite far from the 2020 target of a 40% cut. But it's moving in the right direction, at least. But you can also see at the tail there of that graph that there's a little bit of a hiccup happening there. And that's different influences. One is very simple. It's always nice to say it's the weather, right? So cold winters, you have higher emissions immediately. That's the case in Germany, at least. And then it's also some stickiness of some of the coal in the market has been an issue. And then it's also emissions that are outside the electricity sector, which are not as well addressed maybe so far. And one is transport, a real issue. In a lot of countries, a real issue. And then it's also non-energy emissions in industrial processes. And of course also agriculture, et cetera, et cetera. But if we just look at where we are today, 2016, we had an uptick again. So at the end of the curve, again, an uptick of less than 1%, but still of the emissions. But if we look at the electricity sector, those emissions went down 1.6% year on year. So now, if we want to know how does this whole idea of decarbonization or decoupling of economic growth and emissions work, because it certainly is one thing to just cut your emissions, right? I mean, you just shut down all the plants and here you are. But the real goal there is, of course, to have economic growth and reduce the emissions. And here we can see that this is actually pretty much the case. Between 2000 and 2015, we have a doubling of GDP. So it's not nothing. We're not talking about stagnation or zero growth society or any such thing. It is significant growth. You can also see very well the dent there around 2008, and of course, but then also it's going back up again. And then the other curves is, one is the energy intensity of GDP. That's the pinkish line, and then the purple line is the greenhouse gas intensity of GDP. And they're very closely related, but one is a little bit lower than the other. And it shows two interesting things. It shows one is, yes, we're reducing the energy intensity, meaning we're improving the energy efficiency of the economy. And beyond that, we are also starting the decarbonization of the economy. We're not, I mean, this is not miracle work. This is, you can see, it's hard work, year on year, a little bit, eating at it. But still, electricity is very interesting. It's one of the areas where the most action is happening. So let's have a closer look at the electricity sector. And this is now 1990 to 2016. And the bars, so the bright green is the renewables area, the yellow is natural gas, and then you see the gray bars are hard coal, and then orange is nuclear, and then you say it's purple, right? Is that the bottom thing is purple? That's brown coal or lignite. And what's very interesting is, of course, you can see renewables are really growing into this very quickly. It's now the single largest contributor for electricity in Germany. And actually in 2016, on the very best day of the year 2016, that was May 8th, there was 86% of electricity from renewables alone. Of course, that's not the average, but just as a highlight. And what's interesting, because we had problems with natural gas in the past, you see that there's been higher shares of yellow and then shrinking shares, and it's coming back now a little bit thanks to lower gas prices, also natural gas prices in Germany. And so we're eating away a little bit at the hard coal, but even more at the brown coal or lignite. And it's really, these two are the main issues, and especially the lignite brown coal is an issue because it's very cheap, abundant, but it also has very low energy value and is high in pollutants. So it's not an ideal energy source. And if you look at it, really, it's interesting that you call hard coal and lignite both coal, because one really looks like semi-decayed wood, more or less, in the raw, in the unprocessed state. But anyway, it's there. It's still being used a lot, and we're cutting it back slowly. What you can also see is the decrease of the orange over time. It's the nuclear phase out in Germany, and this will be completed by 2022. So it's not a, they don't switch off all the power plants, but it's a slow, orderly German process as well. But now let's look back. We had these targets, and one of the targets was for 2020 to have 35% of renewable electricity consumption. So this is generation here. So in the consumption side, so where are we there? And right now, we're over 32% of renewables in electricity consumed, and it's quite a way up. In 1991, it was 3.2% only. And so this is pretty good. It's an interesting number. Of course, this will be revised. This is now an early note about last year, and people who work in statistics know this number will go up and down over the coming months, but it will be above 30%. And that's already good. It's in reach of the 2020 target, so it's not totally unrealistic that this will be met. And then if you take all this target thing aside, because that's just one, it's just, it's not laws of physics. So just looking at it, it's almost a third of electricity coming from renewables. It's coming from wind, from PV, it's coming from biomass. And in wind, we have an increasing share of offshore wind energy now. Very interesting, maybe less for Arizona as a topic, but anyway, solar definitely is. And if you look at it, Germany overall has very low potentials for renewable energy. We have the solar potential of Alaska. And maybe we're crazy, but we're still having this high share there. So this is very interesting. We're also very different from Arizona in a way that we're a winter peaker, meaning we have the highest electricity consumption in the winter when it's dark and cold in Germany. And so air conditioning is less of an issue in Germany. So it's a different, as I said earlier, the energy climate thing is different in a lot of the details, but of course some is similar. Now, we've laughed a little bit, it was fun, but then what's the price tag on this, right? Because that's always the thing. This is so expensive and nobody can afford it. And in Germany, this is all borne by the ratepayer. There's nothing coming out of the public budget into renewables funding. So how bad is it? So this is a comparison of the average monthly bill. Now, it's of course, it's a bit tricky. Yeah? So it's for a model household with 2 adults and 2 kids in a model home. And there, the German household pays $1 less than the American household. This is from 2014. You don't get these numbers every day. So. But we're still, this is not to say that Germans pay less for electricity. This is just to say we're definitely not far off at all. But if you look at the axis, and that's where you see all the argumentation happening, we have the unit cost per kilowatt hour and then the total quantity consumed. And now I have to do this still. And you see, of course, that the Germans, they use a fraction of the kilowatt hours of the American household, and at the same time, they have a much higher kilowatt hour price. So what it tells you, yes, the kilowatt hour is a lot more. It's more than 3 times as expensive in Germany compared to the United States, but they use a lot less. And it doesn't mean that Germans don't turn on the light, or they don't wash their clothes, or they don't, they cook. They do all these things. They just do it differently. And so they have similar, I would say not the same, but similar comfort levels, but using a fraction of the energy. And that's really the secret behind this graph. Now, what does it mean, though, if we look at the impact on people's wallets? Because that's still interesting. So this will be a little loud, sorry. So this is comparing the share of money from, or share of the disposable income going for all energy, because this first one was just electricity, now it's all energy. And we have 2 lines that are really important. The top one is Germany, and that's the blue one, and then we have the green one for the United States. And of course, as you can imagine, I mean, it would have been a wild guess, Germany, the costs are a lot higher, so it's closer to 5% of disposable income going into energy costs, but that's transport, heating, and electricity. And in the United States, it's below 3% and now closer to 2%. So it's actually pretty low in both cases if you look at it. Of course, that's an average, and lower income households are hit harder, we know that, but still. What I wanted to point out here was not the different levels, because that's easy to understand. Natural gas is 4 times as expensive in Germany. The gas at the pump is more than twice as expensive there, and electricity, we already looked at it. But the trend lines, that's the interesting part here. There is almost no trend actually in both countries. I mean, both in the United States, even with all the, the fracking boom and the natural gas prices going down, very little action around how much of your disposable income you spend. And in Germany, similarly, that means for the German case that all this extra cost has been basically eaten away or buffered by increases in efficiency, but also increases in income. And that's very important, because if you just look at nominal increases, that tells you very little. Of course, that's households. So what now with businesses, right? How bad is this for businesses? So these are just examples, of course. And it's a bit difficult because there's many industries in a country, and then there's small and medium and large companies. But this is just looking at key export industries in Germany and how much of their costs are actually energy related. And that then over time from 97 till 2013 or 14, I think 14. And you can see the dark blue line, that's metals, so that's very important. And then of course you can also see the green line underneath, that's chemicals, also very energy intensive industry. The others I won't even focus on because they also have almost no movement. But in chemicals and in metals, you see around 2008 when oil prices went really up and other energy prices too, we see this spike. And the interesting thing is in the metals it came down all the way again, in the chemicals not so much. Now I don't want to go into the details there, but what happened is of course prices went down again, but also in addition to that, the policymakers in Germany reacted and improved the policy setting, giving exemptions for energy-intensive industries, making it easier for them, reducing the burden. So this is showing the flexibility, the adaptability of the German energy transition. And now, of course, 2016, everybody is happy. I mean, at least in the industry world, low oil prices, low natural gas prices, and also we have 10-year record low and electricity prices on the wholesale market. They're down to 26.6 euros per megawatt hour, which is below $30 per megawatt hour. So that's what industry pays now. Of course, okay, now we talked about money, a lot about money, but then there are other things, right? So what other sacrifices have been there, maybe in terms of reliability or security of supply? And that's now a graph, and it's of course very, polemic almost in a way, because of course you pick which countries to show there, but still this is kind of interesting. So this is numbers for 4 European countries, and I didn't include the United States on purpose, but we have Poland with over 83% electricity from coal. We have France with 76% from nuclear, and then we have Denmark with 42% from wind, and Germany with 32% from renewables total. And here we see the average annual power outages per customer. This is households. And of course there's many reasons, like structurally, but you can see there's definitely not a clear link between the amount of renewables and the grid reliability at all. And it's of course also not, it didn't fall to them. It was not a coincidence or just fate. But of course people knew that with more renewables there was a need for upgrading the system. And so there was a lot of planning, collaborative planning, and work behind these numbers. This is not just overnight that this happened. And the interesting thing is that actually over the course of the energy transition, these numbers have gone down in Germany over the years. So now I wanted to come back to my starting statement, my input statement about the 3 key aspects again, and as the fundamentals of the German energy transition. So we have accessibility, means a broad range of citizens participating in the energy transition with ownership of the resources or financial participation. We have second, affordability. That means we look both at what's the spending level for households and for businesses, especially for businesses that have to compete in global markets. And we also introduced now capacity ceilings to buffer or to slow the cost increase. And that leads to the third key element, which is the adaptability. So this is a third iteration of the renewable energy law, and it's definitely not the last one. And we've seen all these changes in the technology on the cost side, and also in the regulatory framework. So in the beginning, we had this feed-in tariff as the main instrument. It's a flat, simple rate that you get for feeding in, similar to the net metering approach. And that's been replaced now. Now we're moving towards competitive auctioning. So we're moving market aspects into the renewables markets. We're also pushing that way for innovation. We're also trying, of course, to lower the costs. And this is just the beginning for a lot of sectors because, of course, electricity, there's been a lot of progress there. But if we look at transport or heating, we're still in the very beginning. And so there's a lot of talk now also of the sectoral integration as the next step. And to these three, I wanted to add a fourth aspect and call it maybe consistency. So we had these three different governments and four parties part of it. We had, of course, sometimes more, not saying people are always right, but it shows you that there is some kind of a consensus, and it's not just at the top level. And the consistency also gives businesses and households the planning security that they need to be actually able to adapt and thrive in this environment. So what I want to say in the end is that even though this is far from finished and is maybe just the first act of it, the German energy transition so far has shown that the economic development and low carbon energy are not either or choices, but can be achieved together and can benefit each other, actually. Thank you very much. Thank you.